So
Yeah.
I think I got plenty of stuff for background now. On to
Okay.
topics for the podcast. I was looking at reviewing some of the stuff we had communicated about on Facebook Messenger, and you were talking about sexuality. You also had some issues about transfiguration and the ascension.
Yes,
And
I
then I
will.
suggested the topic for anti-intellectualism, well,
Yeah,
among Christian circles and things.
sure.
So,
Yeah, what in terms of the anti-intellectualism, I think that you had
uh,
mentioned that that's a great topic. What sorts of threads within that would you want to talk about?
well, uh, in my experience, now that I've been doing some church ministry for a while, I have come across a lot of church folk who just don't want to employ their minds.
Sure.
There's more of a sense of heart, if we're going to make the dichotomy between mind and the heart and the mind. They tend to be more like they want something, they want a feeling when they go to church. And
Right.
so I guess one of the criticisms that I have gotten from some people, not everybody in our church, of course, is that my preaching or my Bible teaching or stuff tends to be more for the head than
Uh,
for the heart, you know?
hmm
And I remember this one lady who came up to me and told me after a sermon, I don't want to know the background or the history of the passage, Pastor. I just want to feel something.
Mm,
So how do you deal with something like that? You know?
sure.
Yeah. How do you incorporate the background, the history, uh, the Second Temple Judaism ideas or so forth, or the things that from the historical context that affect this particular passage
Right.
in the scriptures
Right.
in a way that can be palatable for people who don't want that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a bunch of stuff there, isn't there?
Yeah.
I wonder if some of the stuff we could talk about here, just couple of thoughts. One would be it's probably helpful in a podcast context to talk about where that came from. Where within evangelicalism or within Protestant Christianity did
Hmm.
it become okay not to use your brain?
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Uh-huh.
Uh, that doesn't seem like a normal default setting. So how did that come about? So that I mean, do you know Mark Knoll's book, The Scandal of the Evangelical Mind?
No. Mark
Okay, that
Knoll's book. Okay,
yeah,
Mark
Mark
Knoll.
Knoll, The
Hmm.
Scandal of the Evangelical Mind.
Hmm.
Um, let's see, I've got it.
Okay.
Here we go. This guy right here.
Awesome. Uh-huh.
That's a great book, and his opening line is the
Mm.
scandal of the evangelical mind is that there is not much of an evangelical mind.
Oh, okay.
And he
Uh-huh.
talks a lot of, he's a church historian, so he talks
Yeah.
about how did this happen, what are the so that it's about probably 30 years old now, um, maybe more than that, but yeah, so that's a good place to go to talk about how we got here.
Hmm.
Um, I think maybe another conversation point would be, and this is sort of the standard response that we all learn in seminary, right? Is well, here's the illustration I use with my students when this happens in theology class. I say,
Hmm.
let's say it's my wedding day,
Hmm.
and I'm getting married to Annie, and I'm up there at the front waiting, and she comes in, and it's awesome, and we're doing music, and there's the preacher, and then we get to the vows, and my vow goes something like, I love you, I can't wait to spend the rest of my life with you, but I don't really want to get to know you all that much. I don't
Yeah. Uh-huh.
really want to have to think in this relationship. So
Yeah.
let's not go too deep. Let's keep it shallow. And that's crazy, right?
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
that would never happen in a wedding, because we know that in order to have a deep relationship with somebody, you have to get to know them.
Hmm.
That's just common sense. But somehow we thought with Jesus, with God, that I don't really need to get to know him at all. That's technical and intellectual and complicated. I just want to feel good things about you. Or even some people say, like, I just want to love God.
Hmm.
Well,
Yeah.
how do you love someone if you don't know them? That's
Uh-huh.
impossible.
Yeah.
So there's a number of threads that can follow.
Uh-huh.
Um, and then the third one that comes to mind, just in relation to your question about preaching, would be how do you I think there's a lot of work that preachers have to do, and I don't preach very often. I preach on occasion.
Okay.
But I think that a preacher has to do to determine what's information that's helpful in terms of putting the sermon together,
Mm-hmm.
information that actually needs to be part of the sermon,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. So you're going to study all kinds of things that
Yeah.
get mentioned on Sunday morning. And how do you discern, okay, here's a piece of information that helped me, and here's a piece of information that they really need to know about.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and then maybe the other axis to that is your context, right? So there's things that I will do in class that you wouldn't do in a Sunday morning.
Certainly.
So the
Yeah. It's
context.
a different context.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
there's things you might even do during a Sunday school hour or a life group, or depending on how you do, adult education, Christian education. What do you have in your church? Is it Sunday schools? Is it small groups? How does that work?
Oh, well, we do have a Bible study, during the weekdays, and then we
Okay.
just have a main service on Sunday.
Got it. Okay.
And yeah,
Yeah.
and we
So there's
try to
things
be
that,
very,
yeah.
yeah, we try to feed the entire person
Mm-hmm.
on Sunday. So we have, we do music,
Sure.
we do charismatic things also, because
Okay.
it's love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. It's every part of your being. So we try to
Right.
do an integrated service,
Yeah.
you know, but I don't want people to park their brains outside the door also. So my
Right.
sermons do tend to be very deep. Some people love it. Some
Right.
people do. I have a
Yeah.
gentleman in my church who's African American, and he just absolutely loves it. He always comes to me and says, Pastor, I just get so much from your sermons, because I come up from this African American tradition where it's all about this excitement and
Yeah.
charismatic speakers, and you get all emotional, but then you go home and you go, what the heck just happened? Well,
Right.
what did he say?
Right.
I don't know if there was any content to it.
Right.
So I almost the analogy I use oftentimes is a food analogy,
Mm-hmm.
because I think that's the kind of analogy that Paul uses
Right.
to the
Yes, sir.
Corinthians also, right? The food, and we're so I think we're so used to getting fed sugar and sweet stuff and fast food,
Mhm.
which is not necessarily healthy for us anymore.
Right.
But a lot of people come from that kind of an environment in churches nowadays.
Yep.
And so when you try to give them the meat and potatoes, the
It's
good
it's
stuff, it's a
yeah.
little hard for them to digest.
Yeah, it's boring and it's bland and it's more work to chew it and
Yeah.
it's harder to digest. Yeah, but when you're stuck on the sugar diet,
Hmm.
your body doesn't know what's good for it.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, that's good because the problems are, one, especially when you're younger, you can eat a bunch of sugar and not really notice the effects of it right away.
Right.
All right. So I remember in high school, a guy playing basketball with guys, and you'll see a guy go over and put down a bunch of pizza and drink a can of soda and then go out and play basketball.
Hmm.
Well, you and I at this stage of life would be hurting pretty quick if we tried
True.
that. But as a kid, your body handles that a little quicker. It's not as big a deal in the moment. You don't notice what that's doing to your body. Whereas now we get a more immediate feedback loop on that.
Yeah.
Um, and then you see someone that's eating just sugar, 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 and then they try to eat something that's homemade that's got some sugar in it, but not tons. That's really good. It doesn't
Hmm.
taste that good
Yeah.
because they're so sugared up. It kills your taste buds in a sense.
Okay.
So yeah. So how then do you serve up the whole meal,
Right.
right? Because there's nothing wrong with some dessert,
Certainly not.
but that isn't the meal.
Yeah.
And if
So,
you just walk out there and hand somebody a steak with
uh-huh.
no seasonings on it that's overcooked, like doesn't taste that good.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's good. I like the analogy. I wonder if part of it is how much of that do you think is simply you knowing your audience? Because okay, so for example, I grew up in a church in Connecticut
Hmm.
that was a Bible church. And we might do some other stuff once in a while, but we got an hour's worth of Bible twice on Sundays, Saturday
Hmm.
nights, and Wednesday nights. So you got 4 hours of Bible study every.
Yeah, every week.
And if you didn't know any better, you wouldn't know the difference necessarily between a sermon and a Bible study. It was just the same thing.
Okay.
And so the content was really good. I mean, I think growing up as a kid, in that it's not
Hmm.
real exciting when you're a kid,
Yeah.
but there was a lot of good content there.
Uh-huh.
And the people who came to that church were the kind of people who really appreciated that. You didn't have people afterwards talking about how boring it was.
Yeah.
That was the diet they were accustomed to.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so knowing the kinds of people in the building, there's probably something there as well.
Would you agree with something like this then? There is a need for those kinds of churches where there's a lot of charisma for sugar type churches also. For younger Christians also, that can be a very, very good thing, you know? But for the food for babies is different from the food for adults. Let's put it that way.
Oh, it is. It is. But
Uh-huh.
I think the sugar thing is helpful because actually sugar is worse for babies than it is for adults.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Right. So I think what you can say is this is why Paul talks about the milk.
Yeah.
Right? Milk is good for babies. Now
Yeah.
Hebrews says you shouldn't just need milk. You're adults now.
Uh-huh.
Eat some meat and potatoes. And so
Yeah.
there's when you think about like a really good children's Sunday school or something like that. It's milk. It's not sugar.
Yeah.
It's not just entertainment, but it's simple, right? It's
Yeah.
it's easily digestible for a 7-year-old or a 5-year-old. There is a difference between that and simply being entertained.
True.
We
Uh-huh.
were at a church. We went to visit a church here in Spokane when we first got here, and bigger church, lots of bells and whistles, lots of show, lots of production, which is not all bad.
Mm-hmm.
Kids went to the kids classes, and my son, who I think is 5 at the time, comes out and they watched a Berenstain Bears video in their kids class.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yeah.
that's sugar. That's not
Yeah.
milk, right?
Uh-huh.
So I wonder if you need sort of 3 points on the compass to say milk, solid food, and just empty carbs, the sugar diet.
Yeah.
And
Uh-huh.
2 of them are appropriate depending on the context.
Yeah.
And one of them is never appropriate
Uh-huh.
as a diet, right?
Okay.
As a
Right.
diet. So I wonder if you could say, yeah, when you've got a bunch of new Christians or non-Christians, people that are young in their faith, you're not just going to start doing a series through Hebrews all of a sudden or
Right.
Revelation or something like that. That'd be a bad idea. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so there's lower shelf material that's still good for you, right?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm guessing the real key to being to pastoring is really to know where your congregation is, where your particular people are. And
Yeah.
that each one might be a little bit different also. So you're going to have to tailor and adjust yourself and the teaching to kind of
Yep.
mix and match. But also, you don't want to just keep it at that same level. You want to actually stretch them a little bit, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
This
So,
is a place, to be honest, where I think I have an easier job as a teacher
okay.
because I have my classes are part of a standardized curriculum to some degree. And
Mm-hmm.
so by the time they get to me as juniors, I know what they've had as freshmen and sophomores. Now, some of them have learned it better than others have, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think maybe just a standardization to the procedure, and
Uh-huh.
then after 4 years they leave and I get another crop. Whereas in pastoring, you're going to have the same people for a lifetime.
Yeah.
And everybody in the room is at such, I mean, my students are varied, right? No 2 students are exactly alike, but I don't have nearly the same variety. If you
Uh-huh.
get 25 of my students, you
Yeah.
see nearly the variety that you have in 25 people on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
So I think the same is true for me. It's a simpler system. I think I
Okay.
have an easier job. I think as a pastor, as a shepherd, as a preacher, yeah, you never know. And I don't have a lot of drop-in guests either, right? So if somebody visits my class, I'm not really teaching to them. I'm teaching to my class, and if they happen to track with it, that's cool. But if you
Hmm.
get 5 visitors on a Sunday, like that kind of matters for you.
Yeah.
So yeah. So
No.
tell me how back to some of the intellectual and the background
Right.
materials. What, I don't know if this is quite the right question, but when you preach, what percentage of your time would you say is spent on contextual stuff? You know, information about history or language or background, or just, you know, framing the text as opposed to, you know, the text, if that's fair.
Yeah. Ah, that's a very, very good question. And I think that it depends on the text.
Sure.
You know, some texts don't require that much background, and others do.
Right.
There's some texts that if you take it completely out of that historical context, it'll be very difficult for people to understand. So you need to put some historical context on the text in order for them to grasp the meaning. But the ultimate key, I think, is not just to have that background there as mere information. That background has to lead to something.
Right. Yeah.
The real purpose of a sermon is to feed these people in their context, you know.
Yeah.
So it's like, I guess it's that two horizons thing where you're
Yeah.
talking about that you need that background, but the background is there really to give um, foreground for the
Right.
people in
Yeah.
their particular context. So that's a difficult, and that's a challenge.
Yeah.
That's the part. And each text is different. So when there's a particular text which does not require that much background, we can just, mention a few things and then move on
Right.
to application, to
Hmm.
practical application for people in our times. Whereas sometimes, and I've been doing a Bible study through Romans
Okay.
in our Thursday Bible study, and it's been fantastic actually. But we've covered, well, it's not a sermon; it's a Bible study. We've covered a lot of background
Sure. Yeah.
because in order to understand what Paul is saying, and Romans has been so misinterpreted, great many times
Yeah.
throughout history.
Hmm.
So I've focused a lot on the background, the
Okay.
historical background for why Paul wrote Romans and why things like chapters 9 through 11 then are so important
Right.
to for the context of the Jew-Gentile divide, and those kinds of things. And it seems to me that the people who have been faithfully attending the Bible study um, have just been enjoying it tremendously on account of that. But that's not a sermon. That's a
Sure.
very different thing, a Bible study and a
Yep.
sermon,
Yep.
right?
It is. It is.
Now,
Yeah.
here's my thing.
Yep.
Uh, in terms of anti-intellectualism, it seems to me that when we look at church history, it's not always been that way. It seems to me that there's always been these movements within Christian history, scholasticism, you know,
Yep.
from the early church forward, there's been this push toward intellectual content in the church. So my question is, when and why did we become so anti-intellectual in our church life and now? And it seems to me
Yeah.
that it probably has to do with a fundamentalist reaction to
Yes.
enlightenment and modern science, and we've kind of that has had a profound effect, particularly in American Christianity now.
Right. Yeah. I think I would say one thing maybe to say is it kind of always has been there, just in different strands. You know, that
Okay.
there's always been sects within the church that didn't want to go deep in terms of the intellectual things.
Hmm.
So I wouldn't say that's a new thing, but in terms of where it is now, how it's happening in our moment, yes, I think I'd want to say the modernist fundamentalist controversy, first half of the 20th century. Um, this is interesting because first thing that happens is the church perceives the academy just right running way wrong in one direction.
Right.
It's gone
Uh-huh.
liberal, it's gone south, it's gone apostate, whatever, right? And so the church, and this is particularly the case within smaller denominations, independent churches, Bible churches, these sorts of things, they're just pulling back from that.
Yeah.
And what comes out of that is a sense that you don't need all that stuff to understand the Bible.
Uh-huh.
All that academic stuff, all those universities, they're just going to destroy your faith. Just stay away from that and read the Bible. And when you read the Bible, it just isn't that complicated.
Okay.
And so, for example,
Uh-huh.
this happened in 1999,
Huh.
not that long ago, at my home church. Actually,
Okay.
we had come back from the mission field, so we're back in the States, and we're at our sending church there. And I was sharing that I was headed to this school, Cedarville, which is a conservative, I wouldn't say fundamentalist, but certainly on the conservative end of the spectrum, evangelical Baptist school.
Mm-hmm.
That theologically was very much on the same page with my church. So this
Okay.
was not a stretch move at all. And so I shared that I was going there to do a Bible degree. And one of the elders said, "Why would you go to college to study the Bible? You already understand the Bible."
Uh-huh.
And now, of course, I look back on that now and think, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
So much I don't understand about the Bible.
Yeah.
So there was this sense that if you just read the Bible, everything will be great. If you go to a university to read the Bible, even in some cases a Christian university, if those really exist, there's some doubt about this, it's going to destroy your faith, which is not at all what happened. When I got
Yeah.
to school. What's interesting about that is that in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and so forth, maybe even a little earlier than that, the communities that went this way, that said, get the academics out of here, the intellectual thing will destroy your faith, those communities started schools. And so schools like Dallas Seminary, schools like Moody Bible Institute,
Okay.
particularly within the dispensational world, not exclusively,
Yeah.
but that's a big piece of it. The Bible colleges, these are academic institutions to study the Bible.
Yeah.
They were set up as, we are not that university thing.
Right.
So you think back some of the stories you've heard about Dallas and Fuller, 75.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Some of that. Fuller was evil because it abandoned the faith and this kind of thing.
Still hear that today.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting is,
Uh,
over the years, the teaching faculty at places like Dallas and Moody, they don't think that way anymore, because they're serious intellectuals and they think it's important to examine your faith, and they think it's important to think really deeply about it, and they think that learning biblical languages is important, and learning how to do textual criticism. I mean, you think about some of the Dallas Seminary guys and the work they do in textual criticism. So there's this odd thing where a school like Dallas, in some sense, is founded out of a movement that says stay away from academics. And yet, look at them. They're a flagship academic institution for an enormous part of that, that part of the church.
yeah.
So you won't hear a Dallas Seminary grad saying, "Oh, never mind studying the Bible. That's not important. Just feel things." Right? It's not going to happen.
No.
Even that, some semblance of that is in their tradition. So part of what happens, and this would be true at any school, schools like, again, I'll use Dallas as an example. Dallas has moved a lot, right? Now, their doctrinal statement hasn't changed, I don't think, but their internal ethos about how you think about biblical training has shifted dramatically. I would probably say for the better. But what happens is you get, so let's say somebody graduates from Dallas in 1960, okay, way back.
Okay.
And they go become a pastor.
Yeah.
And 30 years into their pastorate, it's now 1990. They still think the way they thought in 1960, but Dallas Seminary doesn't.
Has changed. Yes.
It's inevitable, right? More faculty turnover. It's people in the academy, so they're just reading books and they're thinking, they're doing this thing. And so what happens is you get a person in the pew, right? A person in the church who's been trained by a person who was trained at Dallas 60 years ago. And so you have at a church level a sort of anti-intellectualism that hasn't been present at the seminary in 3 generations.
Yeah.
And so you'll find all kinds of people,
Uh-huh.
even in ministry settings, in ministry positions, who have this anti-intellectual thing in part because of that multi-generational sequence that they've moved forward on, even though the school that it started at has long since moved on from that.
Yeah.
So I think there's some of that. I think that's a piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure part of it is simply personality. Some of us like intellectual things and some of us don't to some degree.
Right. Uh-huh.
But I think that story of the modernist fundamentalist controversy and that, flee the university mindset that happened there
Mm-hmm.
is a big part of it. And even though the schools that came out of that have long since quit that,
Mm-hmm.
ripple effects continue.
Yeah. Now, would you say that uh, for, well, if we go back to the early 20th century and so forth at that time period,
Yeah.
that there were indeed some seminaries that had gone way over to the extreme, or some professors who had gone that way, so that there was indeed a pressing concern from some churches and denominations. You would see things like, Princeton Theological Seminary or Westminster breaking out of,
Yep.
because um, seminary professors were having
Yep.
differences.
Yep. Yeah, there is that. And so, I mean, you
Uh-huh.
look back in the history, and the reaction to run away from all that was not without foundation.
Yeah.
Now, we might look back now and think there was a better way to handle it.
Uh-huh.
We might look back now and say some of the things that they fought over were not worth fighting over. Um,
Yeah.
I would say that, having grown up in a dispensational context, having taught in some dispensational context,
Uh-huh.
Great Northern University does not have a dispensational doctrinal statement anymore,
Mm-hmm.
and that's on purpose. Uh,
Okay.
because we decided as a community, it's not that, and this is important to say, it's not that we were lying all along and now we can tell the truth. We don't really believe that stuff. It isn't that. It's
Right.
simply we just do not see those as hills worth dying on. And if
Okay.
you put it in your doctrinal statement, and I think this is important, you've made it a hill worth dying on.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something maybe I get this more from my time at Fuller than anywhere
Yeah.
else. I think doctrinal statements should be shorter rather than longer,
Yeah.
because you have said this is our line in the sand.
Uh-huh.
And some of us, well, all of us, wanted to move away from a situation where the rapture and the Trinity are equal lines in the sand. And they're not, and they shouldn't be.
Certainly not. Yeah.
No.
Uh-huh.
And so I look back at some of the early history and say, were there things worth getting away from? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But as time goes on, the continual subdividing, the continual splitting and running away from things over things like, well, you're pre-trib and I'm post-trib, so we just can't fellowship together,
Mm-hmm.
is crazy.
Yeah.
But it gets justified because it's doctrine, and therefore it's sacred, and therefore you either believe this or you deny truth in general.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Which, by the way, is a very Enlightenment sort of mindset.
Right.
And that's one of the ironies of all this movement is that, you mentioned earlier, it's a bit of a running away from the Enlightenment.
Yeah.
They were not successful in running away from the Enlightenment.
Yeah. Certainly
They
not.
did hook, line, and sinker.
Uh-huh.
Just one of my colleagues here, or used to be here, he's now down in your area, calls it an evangelically sanitized version of the Enlightenment.
Yeah.
It's the same thing underneath. It's just got some different words on top.
They were a product of their times.
Absolutely, as are we.
Yes.
And
Uh-huh.
100 years from now, they'll be laughing at us a little bit.
Right.
Okay, it'll happen.
Yeah.
So